Hi everyone, and welcome to this coffee break course with UW Superior Continuing Education. My name is Amy LaRue, and I teach in the Health and Human Performance Department at UWS. The title for our session today is Intentional Communication to Improve Connection. So hopefully we all know that being intentional about how we ask questions and how we listen to other people has the ability to improve the connections and the relationships that we have in our lives. So in this lesson, I am going to break down a few of the core communication skills that actually come out of the motivational interviewing method. So I'm going to break those down a little bit and offer some simple tips that you can implement in your everyday life, things that are hopefully easy to use, but things that can offer big impact if we are intentional about choosing to use them. So let's get started. I mentioned that some of these core skills come from the motivational interviewing method. Some of you may have heard of motivational interviewing before, and some of you maybe haven't. So we'll start off with just a quick definition of motivational interviewing from Miller and Rolnick. They are the founders of motivational interviewing. And a simple definition from them reads, motivational interviewing is a collaborative, person-centered form of guiding to elicit and strengthen motivation to change. So the idea behind motivational interviewing is really using the technique to help bring about change from within someone. So helping to elicit that intrinsic motivation. So helping to guide them using their internal desire to make change rather than just trying to tell them what to do. We all know that that doesn't work and that's not necessarily effective. So motivational interviewing was developed to help guide people in behavior change. Motivational interviewing is also a technique that is difficult to master. So there are a lot of different core skills and techniques that go into the motivational interviewing method. And they are things that take a lot of practice and a lot of time to learn and to master. So I personally have been practicing and teaching and training motivational interviewing for about 15 years. I think I'm dating myself a little bit there, but and it's something that I still need to consistently work at. So some of the basic skills and tips that I'll offer today are things that you're going to need to work at. Like I said, they're simple techniques. They're things that in theory are easy to implement, but it does take intention and it does take time on your part to actually to do them and to continue practicing so that you can ultimately see the benefit and the payoff. All right. So let's dig in. So the first core skill that we're going to talk about is active listening. We've all heard of this before. Hopefully we have. When we're actively listening, we're engaged in the conversation. We're showing the person who's speaking that we are listening through our body language. So we're making eye contact with them. We're maybe leaning forward. We're facing them. So we all probably all been in a conversation with someone when they're leaning back, their arms crossed, or maybe they're looking around, or they're distracted by something over there. That doesn't send the message that we're listening to what someone has to say. It doesn't send the message that we care about what they're saying. So be intentional about being an active listener. And while we're talking about not paying attention or giving someone our undivided attention, I'm going to bring up this. Cell phones, right? As much as technology can be a good thing, it can also be something that unfortunately drives division or distance between people. And it can be a huge distraction for us and can definitely take away from the connection that we have with people in our lives. So being intentional about not being on our phone when we're talking to someone or when we're engaged in conversation with someone. I think we've all seen it. We're out at a restaurant. There are two people sitting at a booth, and one of them is looking down and they're sending text messages or whatever they're doing on their phone, right? And they're not paying attention to the person that they're with. Or maybe both people are texting. And you can just tell that there's not a whole lot of connection there, at least in that moment. And so when we're trying to spend time with someone or trying to have a conversation with someone, it's important to put this down. I know it's not always easy to do, but even just the act of holding it in our hand can be a distraction. And I know that, a lot of times when we have our alert on, so our phone beeps or it buzzes, and we pick it up and we look at it and we're just checking. So we're not trying to be on it, but we're just, I just got a quick text message here. Just making sure that it's not something important. So, okay, we're good. All right. So you get my point, right? So just being intentional about putting our cell phone down. If there is something important that you need to take care of in relation to your cell phone or something else, and someone is trying to talk to you or trying to have a conversation, take 5 or so seconds to just pause. Let them know that you want to hear what they have to say. You have to send this message really quickly, but then you'll come back to them because you want to be able to give them your undivided attention. So even just by taking that quick second to tell them, I want to hear what you have to say, I care what you have to say, I'm going to finish this so I can give you my full attention, can be really helpful in kind of building that connection or showing them that they are important to you and that you really do want to hear what they have to say. So that's our first tip or our first trick. Our second skill that also comes out of motivational interviewing is asking open-ended questions. So when we ask an open-ended question, it's a question that can't be answered with yes or no, or ideally not answered with a one-word answer. So something that I think we're all guilty of, right? Our spouse or partner or roommate or a child gets home from work or school at the end of the day. And what is the question that we always ask? How was your day? Good? Meh. Oh, it's crappy, right? Those are a lot of the common answers that we get. Well, unfortunately, as humans, we're hardwired to look for the negative, right? We're not always wired to look for the positive. So if someone asks the question about how our day was, it's easy for us to think about the flat tire that we got on the way to work or the D that we got on our math test, that type of thing. We have something called negativity bias. So we focus on the negative things. Unfortunately, that's just the way our brain works. So we have to work a little bit harder to see the positive or to find the positive. So in the person that's asking the question, that's you, just by reframing the question a little bit, it can change that response or it can change that communication that we have with that person. So instead of asking someone, how was your day? Maybe you reframe the question and you ask them, what was the best thing that happened to you today? Or what was the best part of your day? Or what did you most enjoy today? That type of thing. So just reframing the question can totally change the conversation. I know that I encourage my friends who are in relationships to reframe their question. Instead of saying, how was your day? And it turns into a negative conversation, just asking them, what was good about today? And the person may take a second. They may have to pause a little bit and search. But the more that we train those neural pathways in our brain to look for the good, the more often we're going to see the good without having to try so hard. So that's our second tip in trying to help improve communication and connection in our lives. The third tip also stems from motivational interviewing or is part of the motivational interviewing process. But our third tip is practicing empathy. So when we're listening to someone, we're being empathetic to what they're saying. We're trying to understand the emotion that comes with their experience or with what they're telling us. So basically, we're trying to put ourselves in their shoes. And I know that sometimes this can be tough, especially if there's emotion on our end when it comes to whatever is involved in the conversation. But sometimes taking a step back, and it's helpful to try to do this when you're not in conversation with them, because again, we want to be actively listening to what they're saying. But we want to think about, what is it? Where are they coming from? So if you can actually visualize yourself stepping into their shoes and thinking about things from their perspective, one of the things that I think can be helpful, particularly during these challenging times with COVID-19 in this era that we're currently living in, is I know parents, a lot of my friends who are parents have been having some challenges with their kids being at home, and there's no break, right? There's school and you're working from home and all of the above, all of the challenges that come with being quarantined with your family for months on end. But one of the things that can be helpful is to think about, we have an area in our brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. And unfortunately, this part of our brain doesn't fully develop until about the mid-20s, 25 or 26. So if you have an adolescent at home or a child at home, this part of their brain isn't necessarily fully developed until they become an adult, mid-20s. And without that part of the brain being fully developed, they don't necessarily have all of the tools that they need to act the way that maybe we want them to. So the prefrontal cortex is involved in what we consider, or what we call, executive functioning. So that's the part of the brain, or that includes things like the ability to think critically or to reason, or it can affect emotion and our social, kind of how we socially relate to others and act in regards to relationships. And so, if somebody doesn't have all of the tools that are necessary, it's hard to fault them. It's easy to still get upset with them, but it's hard to fault them when they don't actually have the tools they need to do whatever it is that you're upset with them for not being able to do. So just keep that in the back of your mind. As much as I know it can be challenging, sometimes you kind of have to take a step back and act with empathy and try to put yourself in their shoes. It can definitely help with the connection or relating to them and where they're at with things. So the next tip that I'll offer you is a small one, and it's one that I've been working on for a while, and it is challenging, but I'm going to challenge you to change your but to an and. So we're not talking about your backside here, but when we're having conversations with people, or we're talking to people, when we use the word but in our conversation, it can negate what we said prior to that. So for example, I really appreciate that you always bring me flowers, but I don't like the smell of roses. So if I were to say that to you, if I were to say that to my partner, when I say, but I don't like this, it kind of takes away the whole first part I said about appreciating getting flowers, right? And so if we replace our but with an and, we can still get our message across, but it doesn't completely negate what we said before our but. For example, if I said, I really appreciate that you bring me flowers, and I'm not as big of a fan of the smell of roses, do you see how that changes the dynamic or the message that I'm sending? So and kind of lessens the impact maybe, or the negative impact that our words have on our connection with someone else, or what we're trying to relay to someone else. Our last tip is expressing appreciation. So I know that this is something that can be hard to do, especially if we're frustrated ourselves or if things are challenging, but really taking the time to appreciate the people in our lives. And one simple tip that I have for you, but something that can really change or have an impact on how you connect with your loved ones or the people you care about, is instead of saying, I really appreciate that you did that, or, thank you for mowing the lawn, I really appreciate it. Instead of saying that we appreciate it, change it to appreciating them. So for example, instead of saying, thank you for mowing the lawn, I really appreciate it, you would say, thank you for mowing the lawn, I really appreciate you. There's a lot more of a genuine connection or a genuine meaning when we tell them that we appreciate them as a person, not necessarily only what they did for us. So hopefully that makes sense. Our All right. So like I mentioned, these tips and tricks are nothing earth-shattering or things that are super challenging, but they're things that I don't believe that we often practice like we should. So I'm going to challenge you today. Hopefully you took a few notes here. If not, maybe go back and watch it again and jot a few things down. But I'm going to challenge you today to implement one of these things. Think about the people in your lives and the connections that you have. Maybe, you've been having a challenging time with your partner or your roommate or your children, one of your children, that difficult one. There's always one of those. I'm just teasing. But I want you to think about someone and think about one of these simple techniques that you can implement. And like I said, when I say simple, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy, but it is something that's going to take practice over and over again, and it's going to take intention on your part. So take some time, think about it, think about which one you're going to implement, and I'd encourage you to try to practice it today. Try to add it into your routine or into your schedule or into your conversations. All right, that is all I have for today. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your time and your attention. And I hope that you make it a great day.